This is episode 532 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, we have a lot of local stories going on right now, and I guess that's to be expected in the middle of August. But a relatively significant amount of legislating and political activity happening in local governments. Starting off, a story that I first ran across in the Downtown Albuquerque News, an online news journal, which looked at the local assessor. Now, if you walked out on the street, even though people voted for this gentleman in November,
if you were to say who is
Yes.
the assessor, would they have been able to pick the Bernalillo County assessor? I say no. I could not have. I'll be honest. So
his name is Damian Lara. He is in charge of essentially making sure that property taxes work as they are intended in the county. So he is a county level elected official, and by work as expected, you have a rate at which property taxes are charged, and then you have several exemptions, deductions targeted at various groups, and then you have the valuation, and that's really where the assessor, they are the tax assessor. They're the one that determines how much those property taxes are, what rate they're charged at. Now, before we get into this story, I did learn some interesting information from reading it. Over the last decade, and this is according to the assessor himself, non-residential property valuations have gone up by 4.5% over the last decade. That is a very small rate of increase. We can talk about that in a second. But during that same time period, residential assessments have gone up by 42%. Now, before you say, oh, this is unfair, remember, this is based on the valuation of those properties and something resembling. You have to generally rely on market principles here. And it's safe to say that the demand for residential living in Albuquerque is quite high, whereas the demand for commercial property is pretty low.
yeah, with a pretty low with a few exceptions. But yeah, if you look back, we've been through COVID, we've been through the Zoom revolution, the work at home revolution, and Albuquerque, in New Mexico, they certainly have some headwinds with regard to being a great place to start and conduct a business here. So it's the commercial real estate probably is reflecting some of those issues. So I don't. It's surprising it's that big of a difference, frankly. But the fact that there is one is probably not as surprising to me.
Yeah, I would argue also we have gone through the internet revolution in terms of retail being impacted by the internet, especially kind of the small mom and pop stores, that kind of thing. We have been impacted by crime issues, which further, I guess, reinforce some of those other trends. But the idea that your business is located in downtown Albuquerque, you're going to be dealing with a certain level of homelessness in any part of the city, any main corridors, but especially downtown, and that you're going to face some expensive enforcement costs that could mean private security, could mean cameras, could mean hardening the infrastructure itself with fencing and various other things. Those are all expenses and they drag down the value of the property. And furthermore, while we are in the throes of this oil and gas boom and the state has oodles of revenue, New Mexico's economy remains relatively weak in terms of the overall nation. We're still at the bottom in terms of most economic indicators when it comes to the private sector. So, Sandia National Lab, Los Alamos National Lab, they have a lot of money flowing into them, but those are either self-contained in their own facilities or, getting back to that office space issue, they are work at home people, which doesn't do much for the commercial real estate sector at all.
Yeah, and then if, Paul, we're going to be talking about downtown Albuquerque, man, there's been fits and starts of maybe a little bit more momentum over the years, but, I think you might have to look back 50 years, 60 years, 70 years to say, hey, when was downtown really, really vibrant in Albuquerque to begin with? So, it's not like everything was going perfect and then COVID happened. That's been a part of the city that has definitely struggled for a long time.
Yeah, it's hard to point to a modern era when downtown Albuquerque was really going on all cylinders, and that is a good transition to kind of the second part of the story, which is that in especially downtown Albuquerque, where the assessor has highlighted facilities, buildings that are unoccupied or surface parking lots, which he calls missing teeth of downtown Albuquerque. The idea being that if the downtown area is hitting on all cylinders, if it's fully healthy, you should have a bunch of buildings, no surface parking really available. It should be in garages or some other, street parking, some other way of handling those vehicles. And that he is going to use his power as the assessor to try to force the hands, if you will, of some of these property owners. And, of course, when a property is vacant, it is not assessed theoretically, traditionally, at the same rate it would be if it was fully occupied and was kind of a maximized building, maximized with businesses, tax paying, et cetera. And so the assessor's idea is that he's going to use his power to assess those properties at the highest value possible, and that includes those surface parking lots, and that he is going to attempt to force the hands of some of these owners because he believes, and this is where you get into the what's happening versus what he hopes will happen or what could happen, that that by selling those properties that you could bring in new tenants or new construction onto the lots, for example, and that he will improve downtown through the use of his assessment tool, which I find personally to be questionable at best. Secondly, that I just think it is getting into a issue of fairness, and do we really want the assessor's office to be, making policy regarding what is happening in the urban area, urban corridor, and if it is successful, and somehow new businesses come in and they're assessed at these high values, should we see a drop in the assessments of those residential properties? Because this shouldn't be some kind of windfall for Bernalillo County and the local governments if, in fact, suddenly we see a boomlet in those assessed values and therefore revenue to local governments.
Yes, and so, I will say that, the concept of how property tax rates impact long-term real estate prices was recently brought to my attention by Brian Dimitrovic, co-author of Taxes Have Consequences. And there's no question that if you raise a property tax, all things being equal, the price of that land will probably go down. And so, but does that really have the desired impact? So it's like, okay, fine, they are they're incentivized maybe to sell their land because the prices will be lower in the future. But hey, guess what? A lot of times markets react to things, and maybe the price already reflects bad tax policy to go along with bad homelessness and a bad police presence and a lot of other strategy issues that we have with downtown. So it's one of those things. It just strikes me as, man, maybe this is, I don't know. It just does not seem like the odds are with this one to really work and have the desired consequences. And much less as that, do we have some due process considerations to where he's actually come out and said he's changing the rate for a preference that he has, which is downtown to develop and the price of land to go down or else make it more expensive to hold, which are kind of to either side of the coin. What are the courts going to say about this? So yeah, a lot of issues. Whereas if hey, we had if downtown Albuquerque had a low crime rate and a few other things were going on, maybe that's the way to do it. But here's this plan. I would just go on record as saying I haven't had a long time to think about this, but I have a feeling that this will not work in the long run and that the unintended consequences, heaven forbid, will be well beyond what any potential positive outcome would be.
Yeah, and that really is kind of the final component of this issue and the critique on it is that if you want to improve property values and overall economic activity in Albuquerque, period, and in downtown Albuquerque, you have to address the safety issues. That should be done through the mayor and APD, of course, maybe other arms of city government. And if you want to bring more businesses and more economic activity to downtown Albuquerque or the rest of the city, you can also bring stronger private sector economic growth, because the private sector is where you're going to get people working in some of these buildings and areas that could move the needle. And it's a tricky bargain because you can argue, well, which came first, the people or the solution to the homeless and violent situation? And I'm not convinced necessarily that just having more people working in downtown Albuquerque will address by itself the violence issue, but I do think that having more people working downtown will lead to pressure that inevitably does result in improvements in both of those areas. Downtown Albuquerque is kind of in many ways a backwater for the rest of the city. There are large numbers of people that never step foot in downtown Albuquerque, no matter how much they try to promote it and try to bring people downtown. And a lot of that has to do with the serious safety issues. So I'm not necessarily convinced that just building a bunch or putting a bunch of new office workers downtown will solve the problem, but it could lead to that kind of political pressure. So let's just say that both governments are required the cooperation and leadership of city government as well as the state legislature and the governor. So all of the above must be undertaken to get these problems solved. It's not going to happen through the assessor's office.
No, and Paul, as somebody who has once had an office downtown in a way kinder and gentler period for downtown, it was not a dream location by any stretch of the imagination, and things have only gotten worse. And right now, if you're a developer or somebody that's going to lease a big amount of office space or develop a project and then have offices down there. That's a bit of a risky bargain compared to other places around town that you can be. So, yeah, enough said in terms of all of that. But it's like, yeah, this may be in the top 10 of issues that might have an impact. But man, there's some other things that would sure have a lot bigger impact a lot sooner and a lot more straightforward than this.
Exactly. All right. Well, now we are going to talk about the, speaking of private businesses. Now, of course, the governor, very enthusiastic about this solar company coming to Albuquerque. Not surprisingly, but they are building a major factory. So the idea of downtown being the area where you build or put factories in is kind of beyond us at this point. But Mesa del Sol is where this new solar manufacturing facility is going to be located. The plan is for a solar cell manufacturing company to spend something on the order of $1 billion to manufacture solar cells in Mesa del Sol. This is obviously big news. It's interesting to me, Wally, politically, just before we get started on kind of the economic aspect of this. Biden was here. He was touting the Inflation Reduction Act and the subsidies for wind and solar. He went to a facility in Berlin with a wind turbine manufacturer that is going to get some benefits from the Inflation Reduction Act. But on a relative scale, this solar facility far outweighs any impact that you're going to see out of that wind turbine company. So it seems kind of interesting that Biden came from one, not the other, because this is a big investment and a big deal for not just the local, but New Mexico overall.
Yeah, and it is a big deal. $1 billion of investment are significant, and the fact that that company's stock price took a tremendous tumble right in the middle of that after all of that announcement came. Not saying that that's definitive.
Interesting.
Yeah, not saying that that's definitive. But I was looking at that this morning. It's like, oh yeah, it really did. It really did take a significant fall. The risks of the solar industry, though, are much more profound, I think, than they are in the wind industry. Not that you don't need certain parts for the generator within the wind, but in terms of making the turbines and the blades and the towers and all that, it's a relatively, I think, lower tech process and probably more predictable supply chains. Where if you're going to produce solar panels, given all the competition that there is internationally for that, you've got to get all of those pieces and parts here to New Mexico at the right price at the right time, or you're going to have a tough time making solar panels. So, I'm not sure if that has anything to do with the stock price, but just thinking about it strategically, those are huge issues, because this is not the first time that there's been incentives to make solar panels in the United States of America.
Or even in Albuquerque,
Yeah.
the Shot Solar, which Bill Richardson really got behind, that went belly up after a few years. Now, first and foremost, $600 million, according to the Albuquerque Journal, in additional economic development subsidies will be required for this facility. So we are talking massive subsidization from the taxpayers of the state of New Mexico. And as my friend Larry Behrens and others would admonish me, you always got to remember where that money's coming from, which is oil and gas industry. So we're taking dollars from the most successful industry in the state of New Mexico, the oil and gas industry, which not only operates largely free of subsidies, but pays massively into the state of New Mexico's coffers and supports all kinds of other industries through the redirection of those tax dollars, $600 million. Given that about half of our state budget is reliant on oil and gas, about $300 million of those subsidies are going to be direct out of the oil patch, which is kind of the calling card. If we have Bidenomics, which we're going to talk about in just a second. I guess MLG-onomics or Grishonomics.
Yeah.
There's a Grisham's law, I believe, and I'm sure it has nothing. It has nothing to do with Michelle Lujan Grisham. I think it's Gresham's law, but her law is take money from successful industries and dump them into her preferred industries, which is wind and solar. And that Inflation Reduction Act by itself is a move. Remember a few years ago when there was all this hullabaloo in the solar industry about the fact that the solar installation companies were very reliant on panels coming from China, operating, I don't know, perhaps with the subsidization of the Chinese government, but certainly very low labor costs, very lax environmental regulations,
and monetary policy that would make the spenders in Washington seem like they're spendthrifts. So
right, so there were manufacturers that had gotten a anti-dumping case against those companies, and they were had taxes or tariffs imposed on them. So the Inflation Reduction Act is a green boondoggle meant to onshore the production of these solar panels through massive subsidization of the industry. And I guess the dynamic that's being set up is, can we subsidize domestic solar panel production enough to compete with China and other countries? And maybe they can both share the market, because of course the subsidies don't stop there. We're talking about inputs, production subsidies in the Inflation Reduction Act, in the $600 million coming from the state. You also have mandates and tax credits for the addition of those panels to buildings, whether it's private sector, public sector, or beyond. So what we are really talking about in regard to Bidenomics is just massive printing of money to transfer those dollars to preferred industries of this president, the Biden administration as a whole. So it's I believe there's a line about it's all turtles all the way down. Well, in this case, it's all subsidies all the way down.
Yeah, and then the other thing, when you look at subsidizing or providing some sort of economic incentive, not all incentives are created equally. There's the abatement of property taxes, and you can make the argument economically. It's like, well, if suspending their property taxes for a period of time, back to the assessor, encourages an economic activity for them to come and build the plant, we haven't really lost anything, because they wouldn't have come if they didn't do that. But then there's real money, you know what I mean, where we have collected it in our budget and it's basically transferred to the other industry. And the best example of that is the subsidy for impoverished Hollywood's executives, which is the film subsidy in New Mexico. And so that takes a real appropriation. So it'll be interesting to see how these various forms of additional support from the state comes out, in terms of how much is out of pocket versus how much is maybe avoiding or delaying the tax-paying capability until sometime in the future. Maybe they should try that in the downtown Albuquerque lots, though. Give them money to develop buildings. Maybe that would do it. So, and it's the same idea, though, when you get right down to it. So,
yeah, why not? Just keep throwing money at them until they do exactly what you want, where they want. Along with the posting at Heirs of Enchantment on this, I included the best chart available that I saw, which is a breakdown of where which industries are subsidized. Now, it's kind of old. It's 2016, but it's the best I could find. And as of 2016, renewables received approximately 60% of the subsidies. I'm sure that number is much higher, but it's even higher still once you look at a per kilowatt hour generated, or especially a per kilowatt hour that is useful, that obviates the need for backup and other sources of electricity generation because, we all know it's a truism. The wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. So while those may be generating a lot of electricity, in fact, California's had times where they've generated too much electricity. Too much electricity isn't really great, especially when you don't need it and it goes away just as easily as it comes. So you have to have predominantly natural gas plants or possibly battery powered or sometimes both in order to actually keep the electricity going. So the subsidies are almost always underestimated when it comes to renewables in these kinds of charts. I haven't seen one that really factors in all of the many subsidies, but I do include a chart of the portfolio of electricity generation for that same year. 1% for solar, wind 6%. So within the grand scheme of things, and yeah, it's a bit dated. Wind and solar have taken some market share, but the reality is that these are still relatively tiny fractions of our overall electricity generation portfolio.
Yeah, no question, particularly when it comes to solar. And, the thing about New Mexico is it is a good location for solar. So if you're going to build it anywhere in the U.S., it's probably Arizona, New Mexico, parts of Southern California, Nevada is where you'd want to do it. Relatively low latitudes, low humidity, a lot of days of sun. Once we start building solar panels in the Midwest and upper Midwest and East, game over. That's a thing called a waste of money.
Yeah, now back to the local government angle, and this one we travel up to Santa Fe, where the high-end excise tax vote has been scheduled for this Wednesday, August 22nd. There's going to be a special meeting of Santa Fe's City Council on that excise tax. It looks like the meeting has been planned for the convention center because of the controversial nature of this issue. We talked about it a while back. Our philosophy on this hasn't changed, but the idea is to levy a 3% excise tax on the sale of any home that is sold for $1 million or more. Yes, Santa Fe is a very expensive city already, given the price of housing and the way it's leapt in recent years, particularly in Santa Fe. It won't be long till large numbers of relatively middle-class home sellers will fall prey to this 3% tax. But as Riley White said on our podcast, the UNM professor, the amount of money that will be generated by this is not nearly enough to really make a dent in the affordability issue, even if it does succeed and doesn't result in the just bidding up of those lower, because you're going to fund a fund for affordable housing. Well, when you dump a bunch of money into a fund for affordable housing, you can wind up bidding up the costs of those more affordable houses to the point where they become less affordable. That doesn't really solve the problem. It just lines the pockets of those particular property owners. So this is a fraught issue. It's not the first time, and certainly won't be the last time Santa Fe local government shoots itself in the foot, but that kind of is what Santa Fe city and county are known for, but specifically the city.
They don't call them the city different because they do everything the same is the first point. And then the other point, Paul, is that, if you have this is basically another transaction cost. And when you have transaction cost associated with selling something, whether it's a share of stock or a home over $1 million, you would tend to, all things being equal, you'll tend to slow down the number of sales. They'll be delayed. They'll be done different ways. Is this what Santa Fe wants? So, I think it may at some point, and again, let's look at we know what the intended consequences are, is they want more money from who they perceive to be the affluent of Santa Fe. But are they going to, in essence, have a lot more unoccupied houses in Santa Fe, because people are saying, well, yeah, we have our little Santa Fe house, but if we sell it, we have to pay too much money. So let's just hold on to it and we'll have it passed in the next generation, 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now. So have they looked at that? No, they never have, and they probably never will, but it will be fascinating to see whether this goes forward. And, you know, in some ways, Paul, I enjoy it when Santa Fe goes way out there on these things. It provides a pretty interesting natural experiment that hopefully I will not personally be subject to. But I have a feeling that when we look back at this thing again, what is it really going to do? What they accomplish, and then that what are going to be the consequences? And my prediction would be if this passes, it's going to be more unoccupied second homes in Santa Fe than we even have right now. So that's one of the Santa Fe's largest residents is somebody who lives somewhere else and just comes to Santa Fe intermittently.
Yeah, I think at the very, very least, you need to create some kind of adjustment in the law if they do pass this to account for the fact that housing prices and values are rising in Santa Fe. So, just like they do now for federal income taxes, add an inflation adjustment every year to make sure that you're not catching more and more home sales in this in the mix. But obviously, the preferred policy is to not enact this at all and instead pursue a more market-based option of expanding housing options through, broadly speaking, free market forces and allowing housing to be built in the areas of Santa Fe where housing can be built. And if that means that you don't have housing, new housing in the historical areas down around the plaza, places where you have very little open land, and that, people have to live near Cerrillos Road and I-25, that isn't the end of the world, at least as I see it. But just create the extra supply where possible, understanding that there are some geographical limitations on the land. There's certainly mountains and other things that can make housing a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, it's not as stark as in Albuquerque. It's very easy to see, but you have tribal and Pueblo land, you have Forest Service land, you have all of that. And the other thing is there, the people who are saying, oh, we need to solve this problem of affordable housing. Yeah, that's one thing. But, Santa Fe pretty much had the policy of, I was the last one in, I want the door closed to any future development. That's been kind of the, been kind of their, what would you say? Their vibe, their mindset for a long, long time. And so as a result, you're not going to get abundant affordable housing if you do that. And so I think even if this thing passes, I think the money provided it'll be a drop in a bucket compared to the issue and compared to the forces that they already have that prevent, hinder, slow down, and make much more costly any building of homes.
Exactly. Continuing with our theme of the week involving local government, there was basically a recruiting event recently where governments, state, local, etc. I know Michelle Lujan Grisham. I know the governor was there. I know Mayor Keller was there. And the big, broad pitch was with AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, that government jobs are awesome. You should come work for the government, and we have plenty of jobs available for folks to come and get hiring bonuses of much as $500 or $1,500 for regular government positions, 10 to 15,000 for police and fire departments, all kinds of inducements to get people to work for the government. And it's I'm going to call this Gessing's law, the fact that we have hit a tipping point, and I know that's the name of the show, but that we have hit a tipping point, at least for the foreseeable future, where we are no longer in a are we able to create enough jobs for the people, but now are we able to create enough people or get enough people for the jobs? And I'm not going to say you shouldn't go work for government. Obviously, first responders and some of those very essential services are important. Other government positions, some important, some not so important. And I think New Mexico's in obviously a boom when it comes to government positions because the oil and gas industry pumping so much money into government. But the upshot isn't really that philosophical discussion. It is Mayor Keller in this KUNM story at this event. He said something that really took me aback. He said, these are direct quotes from Mayor Keller. People ask me all the time, who runs the city and that kind of thing. I'm not sure where that figure of speech comes in. Who runs the city? Look, the answer is AFSCME. We are proud to be an AFSCME-run city. Now, AFSCME is many things. It's a government employee union. It's one of the largest and most powerful special interest groups in the state of New Mexico and in most other states. It is the target of the Janus decision, the Janus versus AFSCME decision of the U.S. Supreme Court.
Enough.
Yeah, where they gave right-to-work power to government employees across the country to choose to join or not join the union. And we already know just how many in a previous show that large numbers of New Mexicans relative to other states decided to abandon their public employee unions. But the idea that you, as the mayor of a city, the mayor, the strong mayor, so to speak, right, and you're saying, AFSCME really runs this city, that just blows my mind, Wally. Just blows my mind. I really don't have anything to say about it. It just blows my mind.
Yeah, maybe that was a unfortunate moment for the mayor of rare honesty. Where where does that come from? Was that meant to be a union supportive statement, or when you say things, our brains work interesting ways. Had he been fighting the union, and at the end of the day, he's like, I can't do anything I want anyway. The union runs this city. Who knows what he meant, but. Unfortunate comment for him, but in the big scheme of things, I still think the citizens of Albuquerque will forget that pretty quickly. And what'll they get back to? All the things that are causing problems here in Albuquerque that the city of Albuquerque, even on a lip service basis, is not doing a good job, much less out there on the mean streets of Albuquerque.
Yeah, and of course, AFSCME doesn't run all of the city, even if you take his quote at face value. There are other unions, including police officers, which I don't believe are part of AFSCME. I'm a little rusty on exactly how all that works, but the police unions are a different force and a different group in local government, and traditional left-leaning unions aren't necessarily fans of the police unions and vice versa. So there's just factually speaking some very different issues going on there. But the idea, even with that it's a good thing, or it's something that should be allowed to happen, let alone be discussed in a public format, that the union has such a great deal of power in how the city of Albuquerque is managed. It doesn't reflect very well on a union, because I don't think anybody would say, this city government's really knocking it out of the park recently. And B, it doesn't look particularly good for Mayor Keller. He could say we are partners with AFSCME. We work closely with them. We want to bring more people into the city government. And they're good paying jobs with great benefits. All of that, fair enough. But for him to say the AFSCME runs the city, things you will never catch Mayor Paul Gessing saying for $1,000, Bob.
Well, and then Paul, think about it. Let's just say, take it at face value that these are good jobs with great benefits. Why are they having why are they having such a tough time filling these positions is what I think is really New Mexico's situation. I would say that unemployment is irrelevant here because our workforce, our excess workforce of any kind left during COVID, and the demographics of our state wasn't that wonderful before. So we have demographics, the COVID exodus, we have crime, public school issues, and a lot of things. And a lot of people have left and do leave New Mexico. We educate a lot here and they go get jobs somewhere else. And, it is interesting that even the city of Albuquerque, even the city government is having the same problem that other for-profit entities are in terms of attracting a workforce here in our city and here in our state.
Here you go, Wally. I'm going to try this out on you. A joint campaign of the Rio Grande Foundation and asked me to get more people off the sidelines of our workforce and back into the workforce. Such bipartisan agreement. It's hilarious at once because pretty much if you ask about who are the ideological opponents of the Rio Grande Foundation and limited government folks across the nation, AFSCME is right up there. But to the extent that they could engage or would be willing to engage, I guess the net benefit for AFSCME would be that they would get more dues-paying members because even though it is now a right-to-work scenario, many people who work for city government in the city of Albuquerque are AFSCME members. I don't know the percentages, but it's a large percentage. So say some effort gets 500 new employees, maybe 150 of them are going to pay union dues. Mm-hmm. Spitballing here. That is an improvement. And it would be an improvement for we, the taxpayers, we, the state of New Mexico, we, the city of Albuquerque, rather than having those people on the sidelines collecting government checks. If they were even involved in working for the city, collecting a different form of government check, but maybe actually giving some back in the form of service, because we do need some things. I mean, there's a lot that city government could and should do that would be better off under the rubric of the private sector. But I would rather get something for the money that we're giving these people and give them the self-esteem and the skills of showing up to a workplace and being productive citizens rather than having them sit at home. So that's real. That is outside the boxes you're going to get on any podcast in America, my friend.
So the AFSCME Rio Grande Foundation, putting New Mexico to work, getting New Mexico back to work. That is a fantastic plan. And, it is interesting. All of these, there's industries out there that are looking far and wide to get their workforce. But, the point you're making is, in addition to having low unemployment, which to be on the unemployed list, you have to be looking for a job. We have a lot of people who are not on that list because they're of working age and have capabilities, but they're not seeking employment. And man, that would be, I think that could be good for all of us. The lions and the lambs could lay down on working on that project. So
Carter Bundy, if you're listening, here we are. All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.